Good afternoon, good evening for those of you already in the evening, and for those of you up early in the US and Latin America, good morning. My name is Robert Hooijberg. I'm a professor of organizational behavior and leadership at IMD. I've been at IMD now for almost 20 years, in executive education for more than 35 years, and I think this is really the biggest crisis that I have experienced in my lifetime. And that's probably true for you as well, as I'm guessing most of you are younger than me. So in that sense, this will be your biggest crisis. What makes it the biggest crisis is that it's both a financial and a health crisis, and it's very much a business and a personal crisis. So when you put all four of those together, I think it's really the biggest crisis that we have experienced. For me personally, I love teaching live seminars. I love interacting with participants. Now I'm sitting here in the studio with a couple of technicians and of course Brenda, whom I'll be interviewing in a minute. So this feels a bit weird for me. Hopefully we get used to it. Also on smaller things, not shaking hands, not visiting my 85-year-old mom because I'm afraid that I might infect her, which is not good. Going to a store and seeing empty shelves, certainly in Switzerland, we're not used to that. Also a little bit worried that did I buy enough toilet paper? And maybe some of you had the same concerns as you went through that. I had my son home from college. You know, he should be studying and well, hopefully he is studying at the moment. But also on a more serious note, I think there are some of our wonderful coaches also online. And of course, we also worry not just about our own business, but also the business of our coaches, our partners, who for a large extent, of course, depend on IMD functioning very well. So it's not just a personal business concern, but my heart also goes out to all of you, who of course very much are fantastic collaborators in delivering value for our clients all the time. So we're in this together, but I understand that for the smaller the business, the harder it is, of course, to keep a positive outlook and keep also positive cash flow. Now, with that kind of setup, you may be wondering, how do you come up with a title that says COVID-19? What is the silver lining? And how do we make the most of hidden opportunities? I understand this is a bit of a provocative title because most of you are probably a little bit more in crisis mode, more focused on learning how to do Zoom, or, you know, what the hell do I do with my kids, and all of those issues as you go forward. So the first thing we'll do, of course, before we get to the opportunities, talk about how do you create a sense of stability. But then I think it is equally important that once you do have a sense of stability, you also look forward. And that's really what we want to get to as well. What is the silver lining? What are the opportunities in crisis that you might see? So those are the two pillars on which the interview will be based. And I'm really pleased to explore these two pillars in thinking through how to provide leadership in these times, that I have the author of these ideas with me, executive coach Brenda Steinberg. Brenda brings with her more than 20 years of coaching at IMD, coaching in a private practice. She also has a master's in public health, in health education, health behavior. So I think that makes for a very nice combination. She's very familiar with our audience, but she's also someone who has thought a lot about health education, health behavior. Now, as we are going through the interview, one thing I'm going to take for granted, or assume, if you may, that is that all of you are following corporate and government guidelines as to how to behave, how to keep a safe distance. So we're not going to cover those. There's much better resources for that than we are together. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to interview Brenda about the recommendations about how to create stability and then how to take opportunities out of the crisis. Now, some of you may have questions. That's why we have the Zoom chat function. It was good to see that many of you are quite familiar with it. Just remember, we have more than 300 people on Zoom, I believe. So that may mean that I may not get to all of your questions. And the other thing we'd love to hear from you as well is maybe some best ideas already. I know we're quite early into this, but maybe you have some good tips and we'll try to get to that. So I'll take about 25 minutes to interview Brenda, and then we'll try to get to as many questions and observations of you as possible. So Brenda, welcome, and thank you very much for being here. let's start with the first part. Where did you get your ideas? Because these are, I read them, so I know, but where did you get these great ideas?
These ideas or identifying these patterns have really come out of the coaching sessions that I've had for the last week and a half. This is what's on executives' minds. And so all these solutions I don't really want to take credit for. I feel like I'm sharing them because they're things that we've worked through together in terms of what's needed for the organizations, where people are in the different part of the change curve. So it's really my privilege to be able to share the value that other people are creating.
Well, so I'm already happy that we have a compilation of those ideas. Maybe we start with the first part is, how do we create, I think this is hard to imagine right now, but how do you create a sense of stability?
I think the first thing that you need to remember about this crisis is that a lot of time in business, when we have crises, we think all hands on deck. And that makes this challenge very different because you need people to work together. But you have to physically keep them apart. So many of the ways that we've coped in the past don't really apply to this current situation. And that makes leadership in these times really, really challenging.
So what might be some tips in that kind of paradox that leaders can do?
So I think the first thing that leaders have to remember is their people are looking for them for guidance. They're looking for how to communicate with each other, how to collaborate. So I think the first thing that leaders need to do is they need to be really, really visible, and they need to communicate clearly about how they're going to communicate, when they're going to communicate, what methods they're going to communicate, and the frequency. And even in situations where they don't know what's going to happen, they have to be able to say, I don't know, but this is how I'm going to communicate with you, or this is how we're going to find the situation. So you need to be able to let people know how you're coming to solutions. And the more clear that you can be on that, the more stability you're going to have.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And besides clarity, now we have people sitting all over the place. I'm looking at the screen with many pictures. Yeah. Besides the clarity around decision making?
Yeah, I think there's one other part of that. And that has to do with you need to be able to spread your time across the organization. Oftentimes we think, when we're in crisis, if you're only spending your time with people on the top, you're setting a couple different messages. The first one is like, oh, this is really bad, right? So you start getting a lot of anxiety, and that's not helpful. When people don't know what's happening, they'll create stories about what's happening. So it's really important to be clear. The other part is you're beginning to signal that there's an in-group and an out-group. And if you're part of the out-group, that's very demotivating. So again, across the organization and all levels.
And when you think about across the organization, all levels, what about dealing with your own people and your immediate peers?
So excellent. So oftentimes in crisis, leaders feel like they need to come up with the answers. They need to be the expert. And in a situation like this, that's unprecedented, you need to be able to ask for help. But you have to be clear. You have to be very clear in what type of help you're asking for. So if you're working with your direct reports, you need to be able to say things like, oh, I need some help identifying and evaluating options so I can make the best decisions. Is it you making the decision? Is it the team? Is it the executive team? Is it the board? So reaching out versus going away is really important. So that would be with the team. With your peers as well, it's important to collaborate. Oftentimes with peers, we tend to compete. And we really need to be careful not to do that because none of us know how to do this. And your organization will be stronger if you can work together.
Right. It's definitely not a time to compete, but to collaborate.
No.
But it may also be a time maybe to check in a little bit more with our people than we usually do.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's really unique about this pandemic is that people are in upheaval. Their lives in very little time have turned around. Everything has changed. They're worried about losing their jobs. They have kids at home. They might very much enjoy going into work. That's part of their identity. They have routines, and they don't have any of the things that used to provide stability. So leaders really need to be able to understand that people are in chaos. There's also going to be a lot of grief in the organization. Loss of identity, we talked about it, loss of job. It could be, or fear of loss of job. It could also be your favorite project that you've been working on for 3 years has been canceled. And as this epidemic continues, we're going to know more and more people who are going to be really impacted by the disease. So leaders have to be able to recognize it. They have to be able to signal that they're interested and that they're available for support.
Now, how would they signal that they're interested? Is it simply saying, hey, Brenda, what's going on? I mean, maybe some of us are a little bit worried about getting too personal or too intimate. Am I going to ask how your mother is or how your kids are? How do you see this?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to think about is if you're fearful about being too intimate, what's driving that fear? What am I afraid of? Am I afraid that it's going to be harder for me to make hard decisions as a leader, right?
Sure.
And if that's what you're fearful of, that's not going to be helpful for leading in a crisis. So first of all, you really need to be able to challenge that. Second is you need to be able to, yes, your people. You should know your people, right? So you should be able to, if you know somebody has an elderly mother, yes, ask about it. That's care. It could be asking people, hey, what's happening? If you're having a team meeting, maybe you spend the first few minutes laughing about how difficult this morning was from your virtual places, but allowing places for emotions to come up. There's lots of ways to signal it. And there's also going to be cultural differences depending on which countries you're operating in. So I think the more dispersed your teams are and the more diverse your teams are, the more it has to be really active in terms of how you're signaling.
Right, absolutely. So we talked about providing clear guidance, being more visible. We talked about really checking in with people, showing you care. We talked about engaging your peers and having people help in solutions. Are there other things we can do to create more of a stability?
Yeah, I think the other thing is really thinking through which of the routines are already set up in your organizations, right? Which ones are working, which ones will work in the situation, and keep to those. So for instance, if you have a meeting on every Monday morning, keep those because that provides continuity. So the more you can provide continuity in terms of what's working, that's going to create stability. At the same time, you need to be able to think about what new structures those might be and what else is needed. So keep what's working, right? Keep any routines, continuity, add structure.
But also maybe establish some new routines.
You're going to have to. Everything's different.
Whether it's checking in, maybe having a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, you're going to have work that's going to be synchronous. You're going to have work that's going to be more asynchronous. You're going to have to adapt. And having points and clarity of what routine should be followed and where we need to allow more flex room, and to keep evaluating it every week. Every week you're going to learn more. So just keep learning.
Keep learning. Right. So talking about keep learning. So one is creating stability, and as I said, it's a bit provocative to talk about silver linings or opportunities in crisis, but. What might be the opportunities? What could we be looking at?
Yeah. So, I think it's really important when you start looking at opportunities, right? You have to recognize that you can't look at new opportunities until you have stability, right? But this pandemic could go on for a long time. So if we're only concentrating on stability, we're going to lose a lot of momentum. We want to try and have keep organizations that people want to be part of and people want to work at. So it's an opportunity to focus people on where should we be going in the future? What new business opportunities this might be? What new markets? What new services? what new delivery options. So it's about keeping people and getting people to think about what's possible.
Now, wouldn't you, before you do that, wouldn't you want to get rid of maybe some unproductive areas, low margin products, low margin services? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an opportunity to look at what's not working or what haven't we been courageous enough to cut.
Yeah,
so it's definitely an opportunity, but I think you need to be very careful in when you're doing it, because the world has just changed. So the things that weren't profitable in the past might be profitable in the new. So you need to make sure that you're looking at it with a new lens and not necessarily a low lens. An old lens. So you need to really carefully be able to think about that. And you also might want to time this, because there's a lot of grief in the organization. So the timing of getting rid of things might be an important consideration. It may not be the most important consideration, but you need to be able to think, how is that impacting the people you're working with and are trying to bring along?
And I guess at IND, we're trying to look more at online education as we speak, so which traditionally was not as profitable a line as before. So yes, we're trying to do exactly what you just said. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Now, another part maybe, this is a lot of technological aspects about this. I think you had some interesting ideas about intergenerational work as well. Yeah,
I think one of the most promising silver linings is that they're huge intergenerational. We have huge differences in the different generations, and they're going to be able to contribute to this pandemic in different ways. And I think that could be very positive for the organization. Our millennials and our Generation Zs, they know these technologies. They're really quick to adapt. They're excellent at creating different types of communities and connections that people like me and many of the people I coach were not quite used to doing. And so I think that could be great. And I think it could be great to partner up people who are older, who've got the experience, who have the business knowledge, and people who are more forward thinking. So I think we could really start creating organizations that our next generation want to work at. And that could be a silver lining.
That's great. Just one thing, I think even people who've been in the business a long time can still be forward thinking, right? Especially given that I'm at IMD 20 years.
There are a few exceptions.
There are a few exceptions. Okay, thank you for that. Now, one additional point that I really liked about your paper, which I thought was a bit paradoxical, at least I hadn't thought of it, is it's also an opportunity for personal and team development. And clearly you already mentioned some areas of development, but I was curious about the personal and team development opportunities.
Yeah. So just like it's the same thing, you want people to be thinking forward. You want them to be connecting and thinking about new possibilities. So that's both on an organizational level, but it also has to be on a personal level. This pandemic creates an opportunity for really short-term, concrete learning. And oftentimes during hardships, we put learning aside, we put it on hold. But I really think that's a mistake. I think you can be having conversations with people is, what do you want to learn right now? When this is over, what skills do you need? What are you interested in being able to pursue? How can we use this current crisis to be able to apply things in new ways, right? And what opportunities are still out there for learning? There's a lot of opportunities right now. So if we can get people engaged on those two levels, both on the organizational and the personal level. And as a leader, if you're investing in those conversations with people, people are appreciative. It's an act of care. And you're helping that person, no matter what happens, think about developing themselves. And that type of loyalty, it brings a lot of momentum, and it will help people go through hard times with you.
Now, I know you didn't talk about this in your paper, but that also makes me think, is there an opportunity, especially for the learning and development folks, quite a few of whom I'm sure will be online, or people from HR, when you talk about that personal team development opportunity, you talked it from a leadership perspective, I talk to my direct reports, I understand that, but also is this a new opportunity also for HR to rethink how they think about learning, or for learning and development to think about a different way of engaging or doing something different even today?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of different ways, to think about it. I think the first thing for HR people on this is to remind people that we're always learning, right? To really help people gain momentum around learning, and to let people know that it's okay for us to engage in it, because oftentimes those are the first types of activities that disappear, and those are demotivating. So it's going to have to be different, but I can't wait to see what the learning and development people come up with. I think it's going to change our business tremendously. It is an opportunity. It's a scary opportunity because, for me, it also takes me way out of my comfort zone. I don't know what those look like yet. So not sitting here with the answers. But absolutely, the one thing that I do know is speaking with other coaches, for people who are having coaching sessions that are already lined up, people aren't missing them. They might be rescheduled, as they can't travel to where they're supposed to be for the call. But those are going on, and they're really appreciative to have those time to pause. So I think, again, it's looking at what's working and how can we supplement. At the same time, I know from a lot of coaches, we're not getting new clients at this moment. That could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. Maybe mentors, if there's not money for it, maybe companies need to look more at mentorship. I think there's lots of different possibilities. And I think there's lots of different ways for us to support you in figuring out what those are.
Great. Thank you very much. There's an interesting comment already that you mentioned in and out groups.
Yeah.
And I think all leaders have in and out groups. We're familiar with that. And we tend to give all the great projects and interesting ideas traditionally to the in group. Mm-hmm. But do you have any tips on how to break through that? Because isolation could be perceived even more stark in these times. So if you're in an out group, it's very easy for me as a leader to forget you even more easily than usual, to be blunt about it.
Yeah.
So how do we really make sure that also, and I think a lot of leaders actually don't even know who is in their out group, because it's not like they intentionally exclude people. So I think it's an interesting comment. How do you manage that kind of dilemma?
Well, I think first, I think you kind of touched on it. We don't even know who's in our in and out group. So first, it might be a little bit of self-reflection. Who am I speaking with? Who do I go to? Who am I asking for advice from?
Right.
And if you can identify that, it might let you know who you're not seeking, or where you might not be putting energy into. But the other thing is, just from a business point of view, it's really, this pandemic will identify, your new leaders will pop up. Can you see them? You need to be able to look for them. And that is, again, that's probably something that's more active than passive.
Like it, I think people are really picking up on your comment about multidirectional learning, Generation YZ, teaching older people how to effectively convene in new ways. Have you seen any of that? What are your thoughts around that? I think you were talking about a point about new ways of creating communities.
Yeah, I can just give you an example. And if you have examples out there, if you could share them. So I'm just going to give you an example. One of the leaders that I've been talking with a couple times in the last week, she is using some of her younger staff to help design the online meetings, both in terms of the software, how to communicate, and instead of taking it on herself, because that's not her comfort zone. She recognizes that she doesn't know how to do that, and so she's getting other people involved in what that kind of communication looks like. They also have institutionalizing collective coffees with her team, a coffee break on certain hours that are bringing communities. Again, these weren't necessarily her ideas, but it's allowing from inputs from people who know how to do these things.
Thank you. Very important question. A really great question is, don't go to opportunities before you have a sense of stability. But I think a really good question is, how do we know we have stability?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I think one of the ways is when you have a sense of calm. When you're going through a grief curve or you're going through panic, you have denial, then you start like arguing, but eventually when there's a little bit of quiet is the time where you begin to bring people forward. When you start asking people about questions, is this possible? Or you get responses for people, like different responses that I had has been things like, right now my head is so full, I don't feel like I have space. Okay, they're definitely signaling, or that they're not there yet, or I'm not there yet. You have to feel it out. It's a give and take. And even by asking questions of people before they're ready, you're planting seeds. So it's nothing, people aren't gonna be screaming, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. We need, as leaders, we need to be able to read it. We need to be able to feel it out.
That's great. And then a great follow-up question is like, well, it's almost like we're pretending that the leaders are all in control and calm, but they have their own home situations and they have their own issues. Yeah. How do you create for yourself a sense of stability?
Yeah, really important. You can't lead others if you can't manage yourself. So, that needs to be a point of real reflection. How am I going to take care of myself in terms of this crisis? What usually works for me? If it's running, I can still do that. If it's other things, what am I going to supplement? I think you need to make sure you can articulate what your pain points are. I think you're going to have to be able to share with your support system. If your support system feels weak, then you need to be able to address that as well. So again, it's not that the leaders aren't also in turmoil, but we as leaders, you also have a responsibility to create stability, for other people. So it's both. It's both. And it might be in terms of just setting hours with your teams of times you're not available. Again, if you can express it, people will want to help you.
Now we have a question that's definitely coming from one of the coaches who is online. Hey guys,
I have some smiling faces at me. Which one of you did this?
I think it is Elias, if I can call him on this one. But the interesting comment, I'm going to take a little bit broader than your question, Elias, in the sense that people will have different motivational profiles. Some much more comfortable with a lack of stability than others. Others with high needs for like promoting themselves or creativity. One thing is you may be able to see some of that in front of you, but if people are online, I guess your question is, how do you pay attention to the differences in motivational drivers, especially around energy and keeping up with all the changes?
Yeah. So this is where leaders need to have some reflection. Everybody in your team is not the same. So you're going to really have to, Elias is on screen, so I'm actually talking directly to him. Everybody on your team is going to be different. So you should be able to think about the different team needs and different individual needs. And then you should be able to have conversations. What do you need? What would be motivating? If you know some people like to have a place to shine, can you create a place for them to shine? If some people really want to be able to share with others, can you create places to share? You have to be able to work. The point that's probably most important is recognizing how your drivers are different from other people's drivers. Because at times of high need, you might be more focused on your own needs and your own drivers than others. So if you're a leader who doesn't need much stability, then really creating stability is what you need to concentrate on. So it's not just what is everybody else's needs, but how are they different? And I think that's going to create the most opportunity to get everybody moving in the same direction.
So maybe time for a personal one. I like this from Jonathan. Jonathan sitting in Bangkok.
Hi, Jonathan.
What silver linings are you both experiencing? So I guess a personal question for you.
Yeah.
And I guess me, Jonathan.
I think for me, this is the first time I've done a webinar, so there we have it. I usually do a lot of work behind the scenes, and then I spread my ideas through my networks and other coaches and the faculty I work with, or the different organizations I work with. And I think this time, after having a few conversations, I felt really motivated to write something, and then I got a lot of support. It was posted on Thrive Global and will be posted through IMD, and it's had over 1,000 views. So I think that's something that I've never done before, and that's something very interesting for me. And I realized I have a few other things that I want to write about, so we'll see what happens.
Fantastic. Well, Jonathan, I had a natural silver lining already for many years, but my guess is you were thinking about a different one. One of them, with not having a program every week, I can actually develop some new cases. I have great interviews with BCG, Lundbeck, coming one up on Julius Baer, so keep your eyes open for that. Important, some people are mentioning that look out, especially for the ones who are small businesses, for government rescue packages. Yeah. Look at your local websites in Switzerland on the cantonal websites. That is very important. So thank you for that advice.
I know Denmark is doing the same. I mean, I think I think it's coming in all countries. Yeah, I think we really need to look at that as small businesses. And I think Philip was saying, and I think this is a good one, although Philip, I'm not sure it's just now, but maybe even worse than usual, that tactics are overriding strategy. Absolutely. My guess is that happens frequently anyway, but I guess in these times especially. So question is, how do we make sure there is a long-term picture? And I guess on the assumption we will get out of this at some point. Yeah. So is that the same as stability creating opportunities, or you have some additional thoughts around that? I think it goes into the opportunities, but it actually might be a bridge, because I think we're going to have to look at our strategies and say what still applies. Because I think strategies will need to adapt, and just, are we doing that in a thoughtful manner, or are we doing it haphazardly? And then the question is, who needs to be involved in that, and at what level, and at what levels? And making sure maybe when we do strategy for the new way, that we have new eyes that are involved in it. People who can see opportunities, see emergent opportunities, and not just have the same collective of people who are charting the strategy. But I think having a bigger picture is pretty important. Yeah. Absolutely. I'll look for that in my coaching sessions. And Nadia has a very good question, is that indeed that many of you are independents, small businesses, and you're lacking at the moment mandates. By the way, not just a problem for you, also for IMD. The mandates are all actually being postponed. Don't you love that word? Nothing is being canceled, everything is being postponed. Yeah. Doesn't really help you in the short run. I'm sure you have the same feeling. But I guess it does sound better than canceled. But the question is, how do you think through about how to get mandates, how to introduce yourself, how to keep the lines open to your clients? Do you have any ideas around that? Yeah, I've been asking myself some of those same questions. Again, I think it's a little bit, in the short term, it's kind of scary, because many of us have had work that we've lined up, or we had, 2020, we were set, right? And then everything changed. But it also gives a type of question of which types of work do I really enjoy doing now? Instead of just being busy because I've been busy, is be able to think which is bringing most value to me, or where can I provide most value? So I think it's starting with those questions and then looking and saying, do I have the right network to help me do that now? Or who in my network might be helpful? Or do I need to look at new ways of working? Do I need to include new people in that? I mean, I don't think there's some questions we had a coaches meeting the other day, and we don't know if IMD will be able to sustain we're hoping it will. There's always going to be work, but how we're going to do that work is going to be challenging. I mean, I think there's some really big questions to ask. I'm not sure. Maybe people have advice on that. I'm not the only expert in the room, so to speak.
Now we're getting a lot of questions, but we'd also love to see some of your ideas and best practices that you've already seen or experienced. That would be great as well. Grinnell, hi Grinnell, long time. Humans will still be humans. I'm not sure how to interpret that sentence. It's even with artificial intelligence, I doubt sometimes whether even that sentence is be true, but that's a side note. But she's basically saying, I think, humans will still need coaching. But I guess what Brenda is also referring to is that delivery of that coaching, the way in which you provide that coaching may be different in the future. And this may be an interesting time to think about how you profile yourself, how you offer those services, and what services that you offer. I don't see any new questions. If you have an urgent question still, shoot it, but maybe I can just ask Brenda, is there anything that you forgot to mention, wanted to make sure you got across?
Yeah. I mean, again, for people who are leading, it's really important right now just to be a role model of what you're looking for. So you need to be visible, you need to be compassionate, and you need to be forward thinking. And if you can bring that to your businesses, it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to grow, both for yourself, for the people around you, and hopefully for the organizations as well. So I think that would be the most important thing to role model.
Okay, thank you very much, Brenda. If I can just have this slide, Cello, just in summary of what we have been doing, what you can see is we created two kind of ideas around creating stability and exploring opportunities. For creating stability, think about how you provide guidance and make sure that you are visible. You show you care. You do that by checking in and inquiring, maybe a bit more than usual. Really engage your peers and direct reports, not just in terms of assigning work, but also in engaging them on finding solutions. And above all, I think this is a really important one, establish new routines. I think that's one of the key ways that you provide stability, of course, around those three areas. And then when you get into the new opportunities, think about new ways of collaborating. Maybe some of the things we're doing today, we can do much more frequently in the future. It provides value. Clearly also think about new products, services, and business models, but maybe clean house a little bit as well. But I like your caveat that be careful, because a low profitability product from the past could fit the future very well. Really like the notion about accelerating, I think, intergenerational learning. And I really like the idea of using this for personal and team development, and you sharing how you're doing that yourself. That was great. And yeah, be a positive role model, be visible, be compassionate, be forward-looking, and basically be a pillar of stability for your people. But as Brenda said, make sure you do that sometimes also for yourself. Take care of yourself as well as you go forward. So just to repeat also, this session was recorded. If you want these points, the easiest way to do it now, we'll leave it up for a few more seconds, is just take your camera, take a picture, so you have the structure of the talk that we just had. So that's a modern way of capturing. And the article is going to be posted on the IMD website. That should be done right after this session. And the recordings will be available, as well as some of the highlights. That just leaves me to say Again, thank you very much for your time and your ideas. This was great. Thank you all for checking in. And I would just say, be healthy, be smart, be forward looking. And I look forward to collaborating with all of you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.